Good afternoon, Senator Cardin. How are you?
I'm just doing great. There's a challenge every day here on Capitol Hill, but when I'm with the Kappas, I'm always doing well.
Excellent. Thank you for taking time, and I know it's a crazy busy day, to speak with the women of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Psi Epsilon Omega chapter. We're one of, I think, 23 chapters that are in the great state of Maryland. And I know that we'll be sharing the content of this discussion with our participants in our social action forum. So we look forward to getting their feedback and staying in touch with your office. Why don't we start with you just sharing a little bit about your representation of the state of Maryland. We know you've been a great senator of ours since 2006, and we share lots of legislative priorities: civil and human rights, health care, the environment. What are some of the most pressing issues facing Marylanders in our country right now?
Well, first, it's so great to be with Alpha Kappa Alpha. What you all do, particularly on behalf of social justice, is legendary. You've been doing this for 100 years, and you've made such a difference in our community. So it's an honor to represent you in the United States Senate. And I want you to know my agenda is very closely aligned with your priorities that you have listed. And we need your activism now more than ever before. I'm going to tell you, literally, our democratic system is under attack. And we really do need to be actively engaged in order to protect our democratic system of government. Now, I was in the Capitol on the January 6th insurrection, and it was a horrific event as the world saw the vulnerability of the U.S. democracy. But the aftermath is just as tragic as we see so many of my colleagues denying what happened on January 6th, and so many people in this country denying it. So we are on this path for preserving our democracy and for social justice. We have adversaries that are out there that are foreign. We know that China and Russia have game plans to try to rule the type of society people live in and bring down democratic states. But we have challenges from within. And the way that we deal with this is to advance the social justice agenda. So I really wanted to first start by saying you are right on target to make social justice the theme of your activism during this year.
So let's start with the most fundamental aspect of our democracy, which is voting. We've been talking with our membership yesterday with National Voter Registration Day, and we're concerned about the attacks against voting, and would love to hear your thoughts on, you introduced S-481, the Democracy Restoration Act of 2021, which would restore voting rights for returning citizens. There's also S-2747, the Freedom to Vote Act. What can we do to really get behind not only those two bills, but the For the People Act? There's so much that we need to do to ensure that everyone has the right to vote.
Well, you're exactly right. Let me give you the circumstances. We've seen very, very dangerous Supreme Court decisions. We saw that starting with Citizens United that opened up our political campaigns to undisclosed big corporate money. We saw that again with Shelby County decision that weakened dramatically the Voting Rights Act with the pre-approval of changes. We also saw that in recent decisions that allowed some extreme legislatures to enact really restrictive laws in which at least the lower court decisions and refusal of the Supreme Court to take up gives us great concern as to whether these state legislative actions will be sanctioned by our courts. You put on top of that the actions of so many state legislatures around the country where they have put repressive laws. And, we've been on a path to expand voting opportunity. Voting is the basic principle of our democracy. We want as many people to participate as humanly possible. And yet we now have some states have sanctioned a campaign strategy to disenfranchise groups of people that are traditionally more likely to vote for your opponents than yourself. That is not what America is about. So yes, For the People Act, sponsored by my congressman, Congressman John Sarbanes, includes the two provisions that you mentioned, the voter restoration, those returning from our penal system being able to fully participate in our society, including voting. The disenfranchisement goes back to the Jim Crow laws, which was an effort to keep African Americans from voting. Today, in some states, as many as 1 out of every 5 adults are disenfranchised under that provision. We have to allow people the opportunity to vote once they're reintegrated into society. So there's a lot of aspects to that. DC voting is part of that. DC statehood. We are denying the people of the nation's capital their full representation in the United States Congress. That needs to change. There's political gerrymandering that's done that disenfranchises communities by the way lines are drawn. That needs to come to an end. Undisclosed big money in politics. All of that is in the voting rights bill that we need to take up and pass, and I thank you for supporting those efforts.
So we were disheartened. So pivoting again and continuing to talk about fundamental rights again, sir. We were disheartened to hear that Senate negotiations over the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act failed last week. What's the next step in the Senate to forward this legislation and any kind of policy reform related to equal treatment under the law for African Americans and other people of color?
Well, we can't give up on this. We have systemic racism in our society. We see that in policing. We could also talk, and we have time, we could talk about the challenges that we have on environmental justice in this country, on our transportation, the plans that have divided communities rather than helping communities. Our healthcare system showed that in COVID-19, the problems with systemic racism and access to healthcare. But starting first with justice and policing, Baltimore went through the Freddie Gray episode, so we know the vulnerability of our own community on this. We need to pass at the national level the sensible reforms of our policing system so that we end the warrior mentality of police, so that they are there to help the community. We want to support our police, but we want them to work with the community, not to be oppressive to the community. We know those who violate the oath that they have taken need to be held accountable, and we need to know about it so another jurisdiction doesn't hire the same people over again who committed these offenses. That's what's in justice and policing. It establishes these national standards so we won't see another George Floyd episode occur here in America, which is just such a stain on our system and on our country. So we're not going to give up. Very disappointed that the Republicans walked away. I applaud Senator Booker for all of his hard work on this, and I'm going to continue to work with him. It includes my legislation that would end racial and religious profiling in America, and would include the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act. So there's certain things that I've authored as a result of the Freddie Gray episode that will be included in this legislation, and we got to get it to the finish line.
We really applaud you and thank you for everything that you are doing, especially as it relates to those two bills that we just spoke about. We're also interested to find out a little bit more from you about your support of another piece of legislation that's closely aligned with our particular legislative agenda, and that's our chapter locally. And that's around environmental justice, and you alluded to that just a second ago. And environmental justice is just as important as criminal justice. So Senate Bill 101, the Environmental Justice Mapping and Data Collection, would establish mechanisms where we can gather appropriate data to see how communities of color are being disproportionately impacted by environmental toxins and other environmental issues. But to date, no Maryland members of the U.S. Congress have supported that bill. What do we need to do to earn your support on this important piece of legislation?
Well, I'm strongly supportive in any way we can to deal with the realities of environmental justice. You're absolutely correct. You look at vulnerable communities on lead poisoning, you look at vulnerable communities on climate change, you look at vulnerable communities on so many of our environmental risks, and you see it's the underserved minority communities that are much more at risk. we got to take steps against that. We have two bills that are pending that are going to make a major difference. One of them is the bipartisan infrastructure package, which I helped craft. It includes an environmental justice component. So in Baltimore, where we have a highway to nowhere that divides communities in Baltimore along the Mulberry-Franklin corridor, we provide money so that the community can be reconnected. We can make that negative into a positive. You talk about hazardous waste sites, you talk about brownfields, all those are areas that we want to have remedial programs in conjunction with the neighborhood. So we turn these potentially negative sites into positive sites. So in the reconciliation budget, there's substantial resources in here for environmental justice. And I could go through many of the different chapters, but it's embedded in just about every section of the bill, from some of the programs dealing in education to the programs that we deal on the environmental front with climate change. And you're right, you need to know where you're going before you can correct it. And that's why the mapping becomes so important.
Well, last question before we let you get back to work. We know that you have supported the Violence Against Women Act. And last question for you today is, the 2021 version of that bill expands firearm restrictions against abusers and stalkers. It adds protections for the LGBTQ community. How do you think this expanded language will affect the chances of this bill passing in the Senate? And what assistance can we provide to push it over the finish line?
Well, here, traditionally, we've had strong bipartisan support for FAWA, for Violence Against Women Act. And these extensions are just logical areas that deal with vulnerability of violence against women. So it's a logical adjustment of the authorizing law, making sure it's also adequately funded. I am optimistic we'll have bipartisan support. I really am. But look, anything's a challenge where I work, working on cross-party line. We're going to do everything we can to get that to the finish line. I know that Senator Klobuchar is working very hard on that, as well as Senator Leahy and others. We're going to work very hard to make sure that's a reality. I do want to add that there's another bill we really need to pass that is similar, and that's the Equal Rights Amendment. We've been working on this for a long time. I'm the author of the resolution that if it passed, the Equal Rights Amendment already has the 38 states that have ratified it. So we want to make that a reality. We think this is the year we can get that done. So we're absolutely going to work with you on the gender equity issues. And I'll just mention one other thing on gender equity. I chair the Small Business Committee. We have made a priority in the monies that we are allocated in the reconciliation budget to deal with underserved communities, to deal with minority communities, to deal with women-owned businesses, to help entrepreneurship that can narrow the wealth gap in America that we know by gender as well as by race. So we are absolutely focused to keep women safe, to keep everyone safe, but keep women safe, and to provide equal opportunity in America. We want it embedded in our Constitution, and we want it embedded in all of our laws.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Cardin, for taking a little time out this afternoon, and we look forward to staying in touch with you and your office on these and other very important issues.
Well, thank you very much, and again, I really appreciate everything you all are doing. You are our champions for social justice. I'm proud to be on your team.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Have a good rest of the day.